Hi, everybody. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. It is the start of a new Jewish month, and hopefully good things will happen. It's the month of Kislev, the month of, wait for it, massive military victory by the Hasmoneans a little over 2,000 years ago. Wouldn't mind replaying that one. But on the other calendar, it is November, the end of November 13th, 2023. And I finally am so excited to have as my guest Professor Dr. Zeev Maghen of Bar-Ilan University. During my graduation ceremony from there a couple of years ago, Master's in the Land of Israel and Archaeology Department, I saw a group of students. There were a lot of faculties graduating at the same time. And I saw a group of students who were just so animated, very eclectic, and clearly very respectful, but in a camaraderie way with their teacher. And it was Zeev Maghen. And I looked at him and I thought, wow, this is a real educator. I mean, this is somebody that you could see has really inspired and gotten a lot of thoughts and not just regular education among his students. And then I heard him on a podcast, although I'm not going to say whose podcast it was, because since then I'm quite annoyed with the person whose podcast it was, because he twice sent letters out to the New York Times saying how Israel was heading into a non-democratic situation. That was obviously before the war. So I'm going to skip that. However, I did listen to the podcast, and the podcast also was Zeev Maghen, obviously, as the guest, was the Jews aren't tough enough. That when people come out and there's demonstrations and they rip Israeli flags, we kind of wimp out, and that we need to be strong. So all of that put together made me chase this poor man for months. And so here he is, Professor Maghen, who has an incredible CV. You're going to have to look it up yourself. But what really stands out for me is how many languages he speaks: Arabic, Persian, Russian, English, Hebrew, and Yiddish. And he, of course, is the chair of the Middle East study of the Department of Middle East Studies at Bar-Ilan University and professor of Arabic and Islamic history. So because Israelis are very not pretentious, I'll call you Zev, and thank you so much for joining me here finally on Rejuvenation.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much, and very highly undeserved accolades at the outset. The most challenging aspect of my existence is being a father. And Middle East's problems kind of pale to insignificance in comparison. I think it's probably true of a lot of us.
I'll go with that one, yeah.
Although recently, kind of as a coalescence of the two issues, we're all thinking about how to keep our children safe, both in Israel and I would imagine around the world.
We are. So let's jump right into it. Obviously, we're now in week 6, I believe, of the war against Hamas after the atrocities of October 7th. So let's just jump right in. We're surprised by the events of October 7th.
Was I surprised?
Mm-hmm.
Well, as a historian, I always preach to my students that, the current situation and the lay of the land at present can change at any moment, and the kind of inertia that we all find ourselves in on a regular basis. We all tend to assume that what currently is what will be for the foreseeable. I think I'm as guilty as anyone else, and that's despite being a historian, seeing states and political entities and organizations rise and fall, seeing all types of cataclysms and unexpected disasters and whatnot. And nevertheless, you are lulled into a sense of, nothing that crazy could possibly happen. People around us aren't that nuts. They're not that evil. They won't come in and slaughter civilians in their houses. I mean, worst they might do is shoot a few rockets at us. So it turns out that horror movies are real, and the 45-minute reel, REEL, that they have been showing to various correspondents and editors and political leaders and whatnot of the actual horrors that took place on that day, that Hamas operatives were proud enough, just like the Nazis, to record, shows us things that we couldn't invent if we were the devil himself. And I have never seen a horror movie that came close.
One of the things that we're hearing from the people who survived is the joy with which the Hamas barbarians, what they took in what they were doing, which I don't know if we even have that. We compare to the Nazis. You know, they were doing this with glee. They were just enjoying every minute. So it seems to be even worse than anything that we could have prepared for. But as someone who's an expert in Iran, who speaks the languages fluently, you didn't have, I mean, I understand what you're saying, because I think even into week 6, I wake up every morning thinking, oh, well, that was a nightmare. I'm glad I'm up.
Yeah.
Except that it's a living nightmare that we're all in it together. And it's like living in suspended animation right now. That's how I keep feeling, like that any second, everything can change, because it already has. And now there's this, what's going to happen in Lebanon? Where's it going to go? Do I know any names in the morning of the soldiers that were killed the day before? Which unfortunately yesterday I very much did.
Right.
And we're all living this, and as you said, trying to protect our children. So given that this has happened and that we're not all having the same nightmare, we're all actually living in the same reality. Do you think that we're going in the right direction with what we're doing here, with how we're going after them in Gaza, despite what looks like international opinion that originally started out okay, and now, as we anticipated, is lessening in its support of Jews actually defending themselves?
Well, as far as international opinion is concerned, I've had a bit of an epiphany. I, like everyone else here, has been pretty darn depressed, to put it mildly, over the last weeks. And one of the things that puts an optimistic sheen on everything is the mobilization and the unity and some of the incredible feats performed by Israeli society, backing up the Israeli military, helping the people who have suffered the most. But another thing that I experienced, and it turned around my whole attitude toward the way we sell ourselves and our current project to the world, is I was watching one of the Arabic television stations, and yes, they inflate the numbers by sevenfold, and they completely ignore. They don't even mention the fact that this whole series of events was triggered by a massacre of 1,400 innocent people. So all of that is true, but they do an excellent job with music in the background. You got this really sad soundtrack, and they show how we just blew the entire Gazan, landscape to smithereens. And there are scenes of people running with children, and buildings falling down, and what have you, ambulance driver crying. And what I've tried to do over in the earlier weeks was, well, say to the world, whenever I had the opportunity on some kind of television station or radio station, or in a video I had made or something, is well, they're lying. We've done everything in our power, despite how they victimized us, despite the carnage. We've done everything in our power to spare the civilians, even though the civilians are Hamas and Hamas are the civilians, and they're all working together. That's what they say. After I saw that medley of so-called horrors that are taking place there, I really just perked up and looked at it differently. And I've been kind of talking about it this way over the last week. What we need to say to the world? We need to say to the world that when 6 million Jews were killed 70 years ago, there was almost nothing we could do.
Right.
We did pretty much nothing. We had a few rallies in New York and Washington, sent a few letters to Congress. Wasn't very much we could do. in 2023, when you massacre 1,400 innocent Jews, this is what happens to you. And own it. Own the destruction. Own the fact that they cannot find bread and water, even though that's
Different
exaggerated
topic.
as well. Own it and say, this is what happens to you. And let us tell you something. Because I think this is what the world respects ultimately. And you need to couch it with pride. Next time you come in and try something like this, it's going to be 70-fold as bad. And I don't think we should be apologizing or even trying to excuse or even mitigate what's happening in Gaza. Gaza's getting pulverized, and it should be getting pulverized even worse than it's getting now. And nobody had any pity on our civilians, not the Palestinians themselves, not the supporters of the Palestinians in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, or worldwide in the West. None of them had any pity on our civilians. So I see no reason why we should be having any pity. We have to destroy this organization. If we got to go through civilians to do it, then we're going to do so.
So I completely agree with you. And I've been saying this for weeks also. The difference today is that we are warriors, and you cannot mess with the Jews anymore and not pay a huge price for it. But as we're seeing around the world, and you have written extensively about this, about anti-Semitism. So it turns out that Jews trying to defend themselves in our homeland causes people to go crazy in London and in Miami and all over the place, because this isn't an Israel issue. This has now become a Jewish issue.
Well, it's not something new.
No.
I was at Columbia University all those years back, and I remember the robots that we were up against. The postmodern, post-colonialist, left in Western countries. We're talking about people who really have had their minds and hearts turned off by a cult-like ideology that there's just no point in even trying.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to be simply defeated and undermined, and those that they are supporting need to be defeated and undermined. You come to the point where you realize that there's no convincing left to be done there. There are people throughout the country who are ignorant and who are kind of on the border between the two ways of looking at things. And yeah, we need to try to show up these, mindless, heartless zombies for who they are. And I'm not saying that on the right there aren't some mindless, heartless zombies.
Right.
Are, but when it comes to it's an amazing thing. You see the herd-like mentality in the latest kind of battle inside Israel between right and left over judicial reform. I noticed something that I hadn't seen in the past, which was that sure, you've got people voicing a kind of Gestalt, Gleichschaltung, same, one voice outlook on both sides, but there was a great deal more variety on the right wing, and the left wing spoke in one voice in slogans,
mantras,
and mantras. Really, I mean, super ultra orthodox. To the point that it's worthless. It's like when I used to take young people out of cults. Many deal was a deprogrammer way back in the day.
Really? Wow.
And
that's going to be another podcast when this is over. Okay.
Well, I'll tell you something. We had more success with people in Sun Young Moon's organization, if you recall.
Yes.
Or
Jonestown
Light Mission or whatever it was. And we had more success with them than one could ever possibly have with this herd of
wokeness.
Wow.
It's fascinating.
Very, very sad. It's very sad.
I think that's another book for you when you have a minute. But your expertise really is in the Islamic and the Muslim world. So obviously, the fact that you speak their languages, which I really wish that I did, I would assume that you have friends, acquaintances, colleagues, definitely students who are Muslim, who are Arab. I find myself, speaking for myself, being wary now, okay, feeling like I'm not going to, the Hebrew expression is dan lekaf zchut, like give credit where credit is due anymore. It's like the onus is on you to prove to me that you don't agree with what Hamas did, that in your heart of hearts, you don't also want to slaughter all the Jews. So as somebody who is very much immersed in that world, where do you go with this?
I unfortunately agree with you. And I've felt this way for years, long before any of this happened. Whether we're talking about Israeli Arabs who, you know, the Israel doesn't want to go up against the entire Muslim world, plus China, Russia, and Western progressives.
Right.
Even mighty little Israel might see that might be a little bit too much of a challenge. So we maybe it's a bit of wishful thinking, but we keep on telling ourselves that most of the Muslim world kind of eschews this type of barbarity, and that Israeli Arabs are still loyal to the Jewish state. Um, I think that both of those assessments need to be reassessed. And that doesn't mean that we should, at this moment, just get up and assume that everyone in the Muslim world is against us, and that Israeli Arabs, can't be trusted as far as they can be thrown. But we do need to be very wary.
Wow.
There's absolutely no question that there is a sense of identification and a sense of, in amongst some even glee, that they are barely disguising at what has happened here. We certainly need to take it into account.
Would you make a distinction between the Gulf states, some of whom, if they haven't come out for Israel, are definitely, like Saudi Arabia, for example, kind of definitely it may be sitting on the fence, but certainly not rah-rahing, as opposed to some of the more virulently jihadist, Iran, let's say, and its sphere of influence, Yemen and Hezbollah and all of that. Do you make a distinction there or not really?
Yeah, no, for sure. There's a distinction between the what are known as the resistance front nations, which are basically those in the orbit of Iran, the Muqawama, the uprising or the resistance nations. Although their populations as well aren't all supportive of the kinds of things that Hamas did. And I think in the end, it really comes down to whether we are victorious and whether we are, whether we insist upon absolutely destroying every last vestige of Hamas, even though that in and of itself is problematic.
Right.
Not because, well, it's problematic because in order to do so, we sacrifice some of our most wonderful, beloved young men,
Already
who
have.
are fathers and who are teachers and who are scientists and who are just our brothers and our sons and our fathers. And even to kill 1,000 of those sadistic satanic monsters is, for us as Israelis, it's almost not worth losing one of those
That's
soldiers,
right.
one of those souls. But the other problem is that Hamas, they'll always tell you one of the main mantras that is that we will never, you Israelis will never, you Zionists will never defeat Hamas because Hamas is juz'un la yatajaz'a min al-nasij al-mujtama al-Falastini. It is an integral part of the fabric of Palestinian society.
Hmm.
And it's a very interesting point here, because if it's true that Hamas and the Palestinians at large are one and the same, then frankly, they deserve everything they get. And then
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if it's not true, if Hamas is not Palestinians and Palestinians are Hamas, that in fact Hamas Palestinians can't be held accountable for the atrocities committed by Hamas, because this organization has Palestinian society in a stranglehold, and they're dictatorial, and therefore, the civil society at large is not responsible. If that's the case, then those same Western progressives should be cheering for the defeat of
Right.
Hamas, because Hamas is holding down and subjecting
Mm-hmm.
Palestinian society. So which one is it?
Right.
If the Palestinians and Hamas are the same thing, then the Palestinians deserve every single bit of suffering that has been inflicted and will be inflicted upon them as a result of this horrific atrocity. If they aren't, then everybody should be helping us out to free Palestinian society from Hamas.
Yeah, I would say that hypocrisy is one of the main things that we're seeing right now. Like when the so-called, because I King of Jordan, right? They get all upset, even though he probably, or at least his family or his country, are personally responsible for a lot of the mess that's happening right now, and nobody is willing to take them in. I mean, I was thinking, if Israel is so bad, and that's one of the things that we heard. Yes, these things happened because Israel was so terrible. Do you see how terrible Israel is? That it put them in such a situation that they had no recourse other than to behead babies and burn everybody down. That just shows you how horrible Israel is. So then to take that another step, then wouldn't you want to remove these people from anywhere near Israel if we're so terrible? And shouldn't countries just be throwing open their doors and saying, come on in, get away from those horrible Jews? But none of us see that happening.
Yeah, that's for sure true. I mean, again, I think there's no question that lip service needs to be paid by uh, certain Arab and Muslim leaders, in favor of justice for the Palestinians, etc. Whereas deep down, not only they, but much of their populations do not feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I really think it depends on the extent to which we achieve our military goals here and what we do afterwards. And if we are tough enough, I think that most of the Middle East, and in fact, most of the world, uh, will end up accepting whatever happens and grudgingly or even not grudgingly respecting Israel for doing what any decent human being would do. If you have a neighbor who you have some kind of dispute over a land dispute between you and your neighbor happens to be, I don't know, a mob boss, and because of this dispute he comes over every couple of weeks with a shotgun and kills one of your kids. I mean, how long is it going to take until you decide that you will do anything necessary to eliminate this threat, including firebombing his house on top of all of his family?
Right.
I think, anybody in their right mind, or anybody who loves, or anybody who cares, would immediately say, I wouldn't tolerate this even once. The minute I thought that he was a threat to my children, I would destroy him, even if doing so required that I destroy everybody around him.
Well, there's a
Um,
different set of rules for Israel. I think Pakistan is in the process of throwing 2 million Afghanis out of the country. People who've lived in Pakistan for decades, who were born there, just because nobody's saying a word. And many other egregious things that are happening all around the world. But here we have a nonstop parade of European leaders who are coming to share their thoughts. and an American administration who is sharing their thoughts, and the head of the UN who himself, I think, should probably be tried for crimes against humanity just every time he opens his mouth. The things that he is saying, he is, oh my God, he is just awful. So one of, you walk around and I think that sentence, it doesn't make sense. That sentence itself doesn't make sense anymore. Like in the discussion about where this is going, I have a son who's stationed up north. And it looks like Hezbollah is going to start up there. And then we have rockets coming in from Yemen. Okay, like what's that all about, right? And so everyone's saying, well, this isn't going to happen because it doesn't make sense. And then I go back to the morning of October 7th, and nothing has made sense since then in a big way. So maybe that's just a sentence that we can't use anymore, because the way that we see things, and as you said at the very beginning of the show, we all somehow think everything is going to just stay the same, even though we know that it's not. And we also, even those of us like yourself, who are so incredibly bright, somehow think that every normal human being thinks like us, even though we know that that's not true either. I mean, like, why
I think
would you
it's
want
important
war?
for Western society, for European and American society, who are probably even more kind of content and apathetic in that sense than we could ever be here in Israel. It's important for them to perk up and realize that many things can and will change, probably for the worse, unless they start acting in order to make sure that this worldwide movement for a kind of less humane and less developed, less sensitive, less caring society is not nipped in the bud, because it's starting to eat up Europe, and it's amazing to see cooperation between fundamentalist and radical Muslims with modern Western progressives.
It really is.
And I mean, if there's ever been someone who's shot themselves in the foot, what the Muslims, what the Islamists will do to the progressives once they attain any influence is something you don't even want to think about.
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the tragic sides of this whole tragedy is that many of the people who were taken hostage or killed were themselves what was considered peace activists, that they would take Arabs to the hospitals here in Israel, that they had all kinds of, and it turns out these people were spying on them. They let them into their homes, and then their homes were mapped out. And some of the people with whom they were friends led the Hamas barbarians to the homes. They knew exactly who slept where.
And Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas himself, was cured of a brain tumor by an Israeli team of doctors in an Israeli hospital.
Yeah.
And was sent back, and because I mean, unfortunately, if I think the rabbis said in the Talmud that if you are kind to the cruel, then you'll end up being cruel to the kind. And I hope that we are developing thick enough skin to be cruel when
to the cruel. Yes, to the cruel. I keep going back to the Tanakh. The wisdom of that book just astonishes me every single time, about getting rid of Amalek. I mean, you have to take evil out when you come into the land, and there are people here who want to destroy you. You need to take them out. And all this chatter about, well, Joshua was such a genocidal book, and did we really do that? And how could it have been? But I believe that this was the norm in the world when the Torah was given, and that any kind of morality or any kind of decency that exists today, that have even some of us just abhorring what's happened, is a direct result of that book and of us doing what we can, as well as others, to disseminate it around the world and change the way people behave with each other. But clearly the job has yet to be finished.
It's interesting that you say that, because my entire life I've had qualms about the book of Joshua, the book of Numbers, the book
Yeah.
of Judges, the book of Kings, and my book, Bible is my favorite book in the world, but there are elements of it that
That are tough reads.
yeah, very,
Ah,
very tough reads, and it really took until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, after I became a dad and have a family, and and I just finally, for the first time in my life, I realized, wow, there is such a thing as a group of people that are so dangerous, that are willing, to do such horrific things, that they need to be kept far, far away from us, whatever is required in order to do that. And one of the scariest aspects of all of what's been going on is that, if we had to deal now with people who were sinister, they woke up in the morning, looked in the mirror, and said, hey, how can I do more evil today? Well, I mean, that would be one thing. I think the threat here is even worse. 99% of the people on the other side who are sending their sons and their brothers and their fathers to kill Jews actually believe that they are doing something just and right. That is the extent to which the propaganda narrative has been kind of indoctrinated and inculcated into generations of Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims, and built on top of centuries of Islamic anti-Semitism that goes all the way back to the Quran, which is a book filled to the brim with Jew hatred. And you realize that you're dealing with people who are true believers, and they are true believers in the fact that your family and your tribe and your nation need to be exterminated. And when you're up against something like that, I remember once one of my daughters said to me, well, Daddy, if they really believe that they're doing something right, then it's not their fault, is it? Which is an interesting philosophical
yeah,
question.
it
And I
most
said
certainly
to her,
is.
I said, good for you, young lady. That's a very interesting philosophical question. But you know what? As a philosophical question, we can entertain it. But it doesn't really matter in the end, because if the Terminator robot, you remember that movie
Yes,
back
sure.
then, Arnold Schwarzenegger, if he's programmed, right? Somebody else programmed him to do anything necessary to eliminate whatever her name was, Sarah Connor. Okay.
Can't believe you
Eliminate, no
remember
matter
that.
what it
Okay.
takes, even though they chopped half his body off and he's still trying to kill her. Okay. There's no response to that except making sure that you do anything necessary to keep such dangerous people away from your population, if necessary, by eliminating them. And this is the propaganda is pounded into them like Bakunovskified babies. Remember in, what was it called, Brave New World? Not Arthur C. Clarke. No, can't remember. I just forgot the name of the author of Brave New World. I really feel dumb. But anyway,
I can't do that.
the from their infancy, this narrative which makes us into human demons, that are responsible for all the evil on the planet. If you read the Iranian newspapers, forget about Palestine. We Jews and we Zionists are responsible for all the evil that has ever taken place, even before we existed, even back to the beginning of time. We become this ontological opponent of all that is good. and when millions of people are raised on that and they surround you on all sides, you better do whatever is necessary. And because they truly, that's what I told my daughter in the end, because they truly believe it, they are so dangerous and
Right.
they need to be kept at bay with, via whatever methods are necessary.
Right. It's not philosophical, it's existential at this point. By the way, it was Aldous Huxley, if I'm not
Aldous
mistaken.
Huxley. Thank you.
It's okay. It's late and we're tired and there's a lot going on.
It is late, and so
One more question. It's kind of an
Sure,
internal question.
sure.
Israeliness versus Jewishness. One of the things that we're seeing that's happening here in the last month or so is people who love Israel, tremendous Zionists, but they didn't really feel that they were here for the Jewish reason. It's great country, family, community, the vibe, the high tech. And it really is. It is all of those things and then some. And then we're seeing there's been some kind of shift here. At least to some degree, obviously not completely, of some people saying, well, if we're hated so much, like, what is this? We're hated because we're Jews. So what is this all about? Are you feeling that? Are you going through that yourself? Because,
I didn't need to go through it myself. I came to this country because it's the Jewish state and because I'm a Jew, and my Zionism and my Judaism are pretty darn fused.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that, I've given hundreds of lectures to, for instance, the intelligence corps of the Israeli army, which is made up of some of the, most highfalutin, high class kind of
North Tel Avivans,
kids coming from the best homes and whatnot. And I would always maneuver in a statement near the end of the lecture, whatever the subject was. It was usually something about, Arab politics or Islamic religion or whatever. Somehow I'd always manage to get around to making the point that, guys, don't ever forget that the state of Israel exists for one reason and one reason only. It is the national state of the Jewish people. It's here for the sake of the survival and prosperity of the Jewish people. It doesn't mean we should, discriminate against or persecute minorities in the country. On the contrary,
coerce people to be religious.
This is why we're here. This is why we're doing everything that we're doing. This is why you're out there possibly sacrificing your lives. You have to know why you're doing that. The responses that I would get from hundreds of soldiers for decades, were just shock, disbelief. I was called all kinds of names. It was, I was always a threat that they would never invite me back. They always did. But every time I would end the speech with a reminder of that basic historical ontological fact: the state of Israel is here for the sake of the survival and prosperity and future of the Jewish people. And every time I would encounter some of the fiercest resistance from the sorry about that.
No problem.
From the
people you were lecturing. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that I don't know how to turn this off. Is what's interesting. What's interesting is that that's something that's starting to change.
Mm-hmm.
I would say primarily as a result. I hope that it will be something that lasts. I hope the change lasts, because if you don't know, one of the reasons that we sometimes feel like we're at a disadvantage is because our enemies have zero doubts about what they're about. They know why they're here. They know what their ideology is. They pretty much speak in one voice. They're willing to do anything in order to bring their, goals to fruition. And you look at us, and we're divided, and we're constantly arguing. And for a long time, there were many of us who had forgotten why we were here. So I suppose one could argue that now we've been reminded in the worst way.
In the worst way.
Yeah. But look, the Holocaust reminded us, and even that didn't manage to hold on. It turns out that you need to have positive reasons and not just, Rabbi Cook spoke about two types of shofars, two types of horn blasts. There's the shofar, he said, of Geulah, of redemption, and the shofar of Puranut, of persecution. And he says that what God tries to get you all hyped up and enthusiastic about redemption, something positive. Here you are coming back to your land, and you're making the desert bloom, and you're building an infrastructure, and you're starting to speak a language that was dead for 2,000 years. Again, all these great things that in and of itself should make you appreciate and remember what you're here for. But he says, if that doesn't work, then God's gonna hit you with the horn blast of persecution. I don't know whether I subscribe to this particular analysis of Rabbi Cook, but sometimes the horn blast of persecution is what brings Jews back to where they should be.
So people are coming to it from different directions, because you have people from religious reasons, or for myself, realizing I had to live here. There was no other place for me to be. Still today, with everything's going on, I can't be anywhere else. I just can't. And my children feel that too, with all the danger that they are really in. They understand that to play a part in destiny, it's not going to be easy. But then you have the Israelis who didn't maybe have the Jewish part, like some of the people that you talked to, but who had that excitement and that, the positive aspects of the Judaism, and now they're connected.
They have
together.
They have the Jewish part too. They just don't always know it, or aren't always willing to admit it. Part of the excitement is connected to that. Pretty much all of the atmosphere and everything, that all the electricity in this country is connected to that. People don't always like to call it by name, but when Hamas is constantly calling us dirty Jews and dirty Jews, dirty Jews, eventually you kind of say, yeah, that's me. I'm a dirty Jew, and I'm proud of it.
We're going to just roll in the mud forever and ever and ever.
Roll in the mud of the land of Israel.
Gotcha. Absolutely. We're going to do that. But first, we've got some work to do. All right. Professor Zeev Maghen, thank you so much for your insights. I highly recommend to my listeners to follow up with this man. He's written some very interesting books. We didn't even touch on John Lennon. That'll have to be left for another time. Imagine a world where there's nothing to live or die for. Very different way of thinking. But thank you so much for your time, for everything that you're doing. I know that you're putting out some videos in different languages, trying to influence people. And that is just so important to the social media and all those fake news and everything else that's out there that has to be countered. A lot that you're doing, and I thank you for it. And I'm sure there's a lot that you're doing that I don't know about.
Everything that you're doing, let's all work together to get to a better place.
Have no choice. We absolutely have no choice. The alternative is not under review. Thanks to Tabitha and to Ben and to all of you for listening. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Chodesh Tov, everybody. May it be a wonderful month for the Jewish people and, as it happens, for the world.